Is your practice too heavily weighted toward just one thing, or are you skipping warm-ups when you play? It's hard enough just to find the time to sit down at the piano to practice and to play, let alone figure out exactly what you need to do when you can. That's where the 60-minute practice routine that we're going through today can be really handy. I'll show you later in the video where you can download it so that you can follow it along in practice and make sure that you're covering all of the things that you need to. I've broken the routine up into 5 blocks which each have different time weightings. We'll talk about the skill that we're developing in each block and the books that you can use for each of them. So why choose a 60-minute routine instead of a 30-minute routine or a 90-minute routine? Well, we talked last week about the importance of consistency. If we treat learning the piano as a marathon and not a sprint, then an hour is a doable, it's an achievable amount of time for each of us each day, but it's also an amount of time that's going to allow us to see our progress. Before we begin block 1, I do like to make a cup of coffee to enjoy while playing and practicing. Onto block 1, and you may have guessed this based on the intro, but it is of course your warm-up, and it is the initial warm-up. Before jumping into the harder sections of your pieces, which we talked about being a really good idea last week, then this is a really good opportunity to check in with your posture, how you're sitting at the piano, your wrist position, how you're moving your fingers. And this all happens before you've even started playing. This is all about starting your practice right. If there's a bad habit in your playing that you're trying to get rid of, then this is the time to think about it, to check in with it. Things to think about are sitting closer to the edge of your stool, having a straight back, relaxed shoulders, relaxed wrist, and generally just thinking about your posture. Even after playing for a really long time, it's easy to fall out of good habits like these. And for me personally, I sit too close to the piano, so I've done so since I was really young, so I've always got to make sure that I'm sitting just a little bit further back from the piano. A good way to start is with some simple 5-finger exercises. Continue to think about how you're sitting at the piano as you begin to play these and how you're moving your wrists and fingers. A good book to get started is Schmidt's Preparatory Exercises Opus 16. These also contain some finger independence exercises, which can be a great way to improve on your technique. Aim to spend about 5 minutes of the hour on this initial warm-up. On to block number 2, which forms the second part of our warm-up, and we're going to call it technique. We're going to begin this with some scales and arpeggios. This is your vocabulary when it comes to piano playing, and this is how you're going to get around the piano. If you don't follow some kind of structured practice plan for your scales or a syllabus, then they often get left behind or ignored. The idea of learning all of the scales and arpeggios can be really daunting, but it needn't be if you follow a really good structured plan. So here are the steps that I would recommend taking. Firstly, if you haven't already got one, then get yourself a scales manual. This will contain all of the scales that you need to get started with, and it's a must have. Next, learn the circle or cycle of fifths and the theory behind keys. This is going to help you when it comes to actually learning the scales themselves. Thirdly, and most importantly, consider the plan that you're going to follow. This could be really simple, like going around the circle of fifths and adding sharps to the scales each time. So for instance, starting with C major, no sharps or flats, going to G major with 1 sharp, D major with 2 sharps, and so on, and doing the same with the flats. A better plan though, and perhaps a more comprehensive plan, would be to take all of the things you're doing, like sight reading, scales, and pieces, and play them all in the same keys first. So for instance, you're doing all of those things in the key of C major and G major for your first grade. And then in your second grade, you're going up and you're doing more complicated keys as you go through each of the grades. At this point in our routine, we are warmed up and we are ready to tackle a specific technique, which forms the second part to our technique block. This should be a technique that is specific to you that you want to improve on now. So for instance, it could be double thirds, it could be playing in octaves, it could be fast playing or melodic projection. There are so many options to pick from. So pick exercises or a specific piece that targets that technique. And a really good book for these is Cherney's Exercises, because they're short enough that you can learn them relatively quickly, but they also go in depth on that specific technique that you want to focus on. Aim to spend about 15 minutes on the technical portion of your routine. Up to this point, we've focused on warm-ups and technique, but we haven't actually done any reading. So the first thing that we're going to start with is some sight reading. This is too often neglected because it's not the most comfortable thing to be practicing, and it's more fun just to play through pieces. Despite this, it is really important, and it is something that we should be actively working on. It's a really good key indicator of how well we're doing in our playing generally. We can really see a lot of progress in our sight reading once we start dedicating small amounts of time to it. I do have a dedicated video on sight reading, and in that video, one of the books that we talk about is the Improve Your Sight Reading books by Paul Harris. Now, these are great because they match the grade level that you're playing, and they'll give you a really good idea of where you should be at depending on what pieces that you're playing. So if you're playing grade 6 pieces, then it's going to show you what kind of sight reading you should be able to read at that level. It's worth noting that in the earlier grades, the music is written more like exercises rather than pieces. So it's not going to be that interesting, but that's not necessarily important here. However, if you have a bookshelf full of music, then this is a great way to supplement your sight reading and play through loads of different pieces and in different styles as well. After spending about 10 minutes on sight reading, we're going to jump into pieces for about 25 minutes. This is the biggest chunk of time in our routine and is probably ultimately why we play. This next part of the routine almost certainly kept me in music for the long haul and kept me playing the piano, even through those tough times where I questioned whether I was really enjoying it or whether I could be spending my time elsewhere. This involves putting aside the sheet music and jumping into some improvisation. That is, creating music on the spot. The reason for doing this is to get straight to the music without having the barrier of the sheet music in front of us. This is about being creative and sitting down at the piano and making something up straight away. It can seem overwhelming when you begin to improvise as you just don't know where to start, but start dedicating small amounts of time, say 5 minutes at the end of your routine, into this improvisation. This is not only going to help you to become more creative with your playing, but it's also going to help you to understand the harmony, the theory behind what it is that you're playing. This can help you to memorize music and help you in so many other ways as well. Not to mention, it's really freeing to be able to sit down at the piano and just be able to play. I've said to put down 5 minutes for this, but if you do, you'll probably go on for much longer once you get the hang of it. Earlier we touched on pieces, and if you want to know how to practice these, then check out the next video, How to Practice. And if you want to download the practice routine, it's available from the link in the description. If you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.